All right, so this is the lecture for Sociology, Chapter 14, Section 2, and the lecture is going to have to deal with religion. The first thing I want to point out is that sociologists don't really worry about the truth or falseness of any religion. Instead, all we're trying to focus on is the social characteristics of religion and the consequences that any religion might have for a society. So we'll be studying this topic from those perspectives only. Alright, so one of the first things we need to do is look at the various functions of religion. The first one we're going to look at is the concept of social cohesion or social unity, bringing people together. In that respect, religion kind of acts like a gang. We always talk about how people join gangs, gang members join up because they don't have a strong family life or a strong presence within the community, and so they join up with gangs to find that sense of community. Oftentimes you find a similar thing with religion. Many times people find a sense of community, a sense of social interaction, a sense of family within religion that provides them some sort of comfort. One prime example of this was a study that was done by Emil Durkheim that we talked about earlier in your text. In this study, he was looking at people who had attempted suicide and was looking at their religious affiliation. And what he found was that people with greater religious affiliation were less likely to attempt suicide. Now, this was not because of any kind of religious doctrine or teachings. Instead, it seems to have been because of the connection that these people felt to a community. They felt more connected to their church, to their community, which took away feelings of isolation and aloneness that often led to suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts. Alright, study guide question number 1. Do this on your own sheet of paper. In terms of the function of religion, how can religion be like gangs? Another function of religion is the idea of social control. Social control is pretty simple, and I think most of you understand it, but just to make certain, it is the concept that you somehow maintain social order, that people in society understand the rules, the expectations, the values that they are to follow, and they choose to follow them more often than not. There are certain positives with this. One of the positives is the general concept of conformity, which allows for a smoother functioning of society. Holy books of all different religions often teach the same laws or values that society wants people to follow. And this conformity that is created by this, as I mentioned, is going to allow society to operate with less hiccups, less mistakes, less problems. The negative to social control is that it oftentimes slows the idea of free thought, the idea of innovation, and the idea of social reform, as all three of these concepts, free thought, innovation, and social reform, challenge the idea of conformity that is put forth by religion. A couple of examples of this would be the idea of slavery, where oftentimes in the South on plantations in the U.S., ministers would go to these plantations and often teach their slaves to conform, not to rebel, because this is their lot in life and they need to just deal with this existence. Women's rights were also seen as a challenge to conformity. Religion was often taught or teaching that women are expected to be a subservient second-class citizen in a household, and it was considered to be a challenging of this conformity to suggest that women should have equal rights, political rights, things like this. A third and final function that we're going to discuss for religion is the idea of emotional support. Emotional support is basically the concept that religion provides some sort of solace, some sort of support in times of crisis, especially. You oftentimes find the positives of this being that there are answers to questions. When some sort of disaster or crisis occurs in society, we find answers or meaning through religion in these actions. We oftentimes see in the times of crisis, this is when we are most likely to turn to religion. As an example, in the immediate aftermath of September 11th attacks, religiosity, the idea of Americans attending church, finding importance in religion, and the number of Americans who identified with religion rose to record highs. Again, this being largely due to the immediate aftermath of a major crisis, a major event, negative event in American society. We looked for meaning, we looked for answers for why this happened and how to respond to such an event. And in order to do so, many Americans turned to religion. There is, again, a negative with this concept of emotional support, which is that because of emotional support, there is a resistance oftentimes to social change. Religion oftentimes provides emotional support for people when things are not going their way, when things are not going well. And so oftentimes what the suggestion from this is that people should endure life as it is. It doesn't matter how bad it is, you just have to endure it and get through it because there are greater rewards that await in the afterlife. And that stunts any push for social change. People decide they are content with life as it is because of this afterlife that is promised to them, so they find little purpose in trying to push for social change here on earth. All right, study guide question number 2. Write this on your paper. Religious affiliation and belief are most likely to increase during times of... All right, the next topic of discussion is the nature of religion. When we look at the nature of religion in society, there are several things to consider. The first one we'll look at is rituals. Rituals are any actions that we do that are somehow reaffirming our belief. Oftentimes they are done in some pattern, some ceremonial manner that becomes second nature to us. Baptisms, funerals, weddings, the idea of bar mitzvahs, prayers, communion. These are all acts that we go through on a regular basis. They're rituals that we go through, oftentimes without even much thought. When one passes on, no one gives second thought to having a funeral. That is just our social way. It is a ritual. It is something we go through. The positives of rituals are that they provide comfort, they provide solace, and oftentimes are a cornerstone of emotional support within the religious community. The downside to it is that oftentimes rituals can lose meaning if they are gone through often enough. Think about if you tell somebody every day when you walk out of the house, you tell a wife, mom, dad, brother, sister, whatever, that you love them. It's a nice gesture, but as you tell them that every day, the same time, the same place, as you're walking out the door, is it going to lose meaning over time? Is it going to, at some point, become such a pattern, such a ritual that you're not even thinking about the words that are coming out of your mouth? You're just saying them because that's your instinct almost to do. That is a danger that rituals can run into within the context of religion as well. Another element of religion that we need to make sure we understand are the various belief systems. There are 3 we're going to look at really quickly, just provide you definitions and quick examples. The first one is animism. Animism basically says that nature has spirits. There is spirit in the wind, there is spirit in animals, in trees, that kind of thing. And actions by society can alter nature. Essentially, if a major storm blows up, that might be connected, some sort of punishment, something like that, to sins or misbehavior by a society or an individual within a society. An example of animism would be many of your Native American religions. Theism, the second belief system, is the belief in a god or gods. Religions like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism would fall into this camp. There are 2 types of theisms. One is monotheism, the other is polytheism. Monotheism is the belief in one god. Polytheism is the belief in many gods. The final element of religion that we need to know is the concept, the belief system of ethicalism. Ethicalism basically states that moral principles have sacred values. Buddhism, Confucianism, and several other Eastern religions would qualify as examples of ethicalism. Study guide question number 3. On your paper, write down 2 examples that I provided of ethicalism style religions. When looking at the nature of religion, we also have to understand basic organizational structures. We're going to look at 3 types here really quickly, just make sure we get the basic definitions down once again. The first type is denomination. A denomination is a well-established group. Usually a large part of the population are members of this group. A denomination, as an example, could be Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Evangelical, something along those lines. A second organizational structure is a sect. A sect is a relatively small group who splits from a denomination. Usually it's because of some sort of differences in interpretation of doctrine. Maybe they understand a religious teaching from a different perspective than the denomination that they were once a part of, so they split off and become their own sect, their own separate group. Jehovah's Witness would be an example of a sect. And then the third organizational structure you need to know is the concept of cult. A cult is a group that's founded on the revelations of some person who's believed to be special. Nearly every religion in society, even the mainstream ones today, in their infancy, when they first started, many people considered those mainstream religions to actually be cults prior to achieving mainstream status. The last thing that we need to talk about is religion in the U.S., and I want to start by just taking on the subject of religious freedom versus religious persecution. Where does the U.S. stand in regard to these 2 concepts? In favor of saying that we have religious freedom, you can point out that any religion is allowed to be worshipped. There are laws that create separation of church and state, and there are limited legal connections to religion. Those who would argue in favor of us having religious persecution would point out that there is some harsh treatment towards minority religions. Look at how Muslims have been treated in post 9/11 America. That there is a lack of separation of church and state, even though laws promote this concept. They would point out, the use of God in the Pledge of Allegiance, certain churches that promote certain political causes or political parties. And they would also point out that there's legal discrimination in society based on religion, something such as discrimination against gay couples in the sense of gay marriage being forbidden, things like this. All right, study guide question number 4. So where does the USA stand? Are we more commonly in the practice of demonstrating religious freedom or religious persecution? Give me your opinion on this. All right, the next couple of slides are just going to give you some statistics that were taken from a recent Pew study that showed various religious affiliation. You can pause and jot down the statistics if you'd like, but I'm going to be quiet so we can move on quickly. All right, study guide question number 5. Write down any stats that stand out to you from the last couple of slides that were interesting or odd. All right, it's difficult for sociologists to assess religious participation in the U.S. Only about 41% attend religious services with some regularity, but this really only shows attendance, not how religious someone is. Many people attend religious services for social purposes or to make business connections. The idea of religiosity is next to impossible to measure because different religions, different people define the experience, beliefs, and intensity in different ways. Finally, we need to talk for a moment about fundamentalist Christianity. This is a growing group of the American population and has been so for 40 plus years. They believe in an accurate and literal translation of the Bible, have exerted great influence politically, especially in the South and among the Republican Party. Their key issues include abortion, gay rights, gun rights, and prayer in schools. And finally, study guide question number 6. Write this on your paper. Religion and politics. In your opinion, is it okay for religion and politics to mix in America? Explain.
Ah!